Most people watch a tank explode and think the story ends there. Metal destroyed, fire rising, a machine neutralized. But the real story begins inside the armor, in a space no camera follows, a sealed steel box, where pressure, heat, and fragments turn physics into executioners. For more than a century, every new weapon designed to stop a tank has answered the same unspoken question, not how to destroy the vehicle, but what happens to the humans trapped inside it. And every time history found a new answer, it was more violent than the last. This is not a story about machines. It is about the cost paid by the people inside them, and why that cost still shapes modern battlefields today. By late 1914, the Western Front had frozen into a machine of mass death. Trenches stretched for miles, reinforced by barbed wire, machine guns, and layered fortifications. Any infantry advance across open ground ended the same way. Bodies cut down before they reached the enemy line. The war had become static, and commanders were running out of answers. One solution emerged from desperation: a protected vehicle that could cross no man's land under fire, crush wire, and silence machine guns. The British called it a land ship. To hide its purpose, they used a mundane code name: tank. The name stuck, but the reality behind it was far from ordinary. The first tanks were crude metal boxes dragged forward on tracks. Their armor was thin, barely 6 to 12 millimeters of steel. They moved slower than a running man and carried crews of up to 8, packed tightly around engines, fuel, and ammunition. Inside, temperatures soared, fumes filled the air, and the noise was overwhelming. Survival was already a challenge before a single shot was fired. Rifle and machine gun fire could penetrate early armor. When a bullet entered the tank, it rarely exited cleanly. It ricocheted inside the steel compartment, striking flesh again and again. Even without penetration, impacts caused spalling, metal fragments breaking off the interior armor at high speed, tearing into faces and eyes. Worse still was splash. Lead bullet cores melted on impact and sprayed molten metal through vision slits and tiny gaps between riveted plates. Rivets themselves could shear off and become shrapnel. Crews were blinded, burned, and shredded without the armor ever being fully breached. Artillery was the final lesson. A direct hit could destroy a tank instantly, killing everyone inside. By the end of the war, tanks had not broken the stalemate, but they had changed warfare forever. They introduced a contest where every new layer of protection would be answered by a deadlier way to reach the people trapped inside. The Second World War transformed the tank from an experiment into the backbone of modern armies. Armor was thicker, engines were stronger, speed and mobility replaced the crawling advance of the previous war. For the first time, tanks were not just supporting infantry. They were shaping entire campaigns. With that shift came a rapid evolution in how tanks were destroyed. Rifle fire was no longer enough. Anti-tank rifles and dedicated anti-tank cannons became the primary threat. Early weapons like the German 37mm gun were effective against lighter vehicles, but they quickly met their limits. Some tanks simply refused to die. Heavily armored vehicles like the French B-1 and the British Matilda exposed those limits brutally. Crews nicknamed the 37mm the door knocker. Shells struck again and again, doing little more than announce their presence. Tanks might be hit dozens of times before something finally failed. It was clear the balance was shifting again. Guns grew larger. Calibers increased from 37 to 50, then to 88 and beyond. These weapons did not just disable tanks, they erased them. At longer ranges and with higher velocities, armor-piercing rounds punched through steel with ease. When a shell penetrated, the result inside was catastrophic. Some shells carried explosive filler. After piercing the armor, the filler detonated milliseconds later, bursting the shell apart inside the crew compartment. Fragments, fire, and pressure filled the space instantly. Fuel ignited. Ammunition cooked off. Survival depended entirely on where the shell entered and how fast the crew escaped. Even without explosive filler, penetration was often enough. Hot metal fragments and overpressure ignited fuel or ammunition on their own. In one recorded incident in North Africa, a British tank crew heard the screams of another crew over the radio as their vehicle burned. The transmission continued briefly as the tank was engulfed. Other tanks fired into the wreck to end it. Escaping a burning tank did not guarantee survival. Infantry and machine guns targeted crews as they bailed out. A tank was fired upon until it was finished, crew included. There was no pause, no mercy, and no illusion of chivalry. War had stripped that away. By the later years of the conflict, it became clear that anti-tank guns were growing too large and heavy to keep pace with mobile warfare. They were devastating but difficult to deploy where they were needed most. The battlefield was changing again, and the next answer would place the power to kill a tank directly into the hands of individual soldiers. As anti-tank guns grew heavier, armies searched for something lighter. Infantry needed a weapon they could carry themselves, one that did not depend on speed or mass. The answer was the shaped charge, a concept that changed armored warfare permanently. Instead of brute force, the shaped charge focused explosive energy. A metal liner collapsed inward on detonation, forming a jet of superheated particles that pierced armor at extreme speed. The hole it created was small. The effect inside the tank was not. The American bazooka was the first weapon to use this principle effectively. It could penetrate most armor of the time from over 100 yards away. Inside the tank, spalling, burns, and fragments injured or killed crews, even when the entry point looked insignificant. For the first time, a single infantryman could destroy a tank. Crews felt the shift immediately. The battlefield was no longer divided between armored and unarmored spaces. Danger could come from any soldier with a launcher. Other weapons followed. Simpler, cheaper systems appeared in huge numbers. Their range was short and accuracy poor, but their shaped charges could penetrate any tank then in service. Survival began to depend on luck and awareness rather than armor thickness. Crews responded with improvisation. Sandbags, spare tracks, logs, and thin side skirts were added to create space between the charge and the armor. Even crude distance could weaken the jet. Protection became temporary, improvised, and uncertain. By the end of the war, infantry had reclaimed the ability to kill tanks at close range. The balance had shifted again, and once more, it was the people inside the armor who paid the price. After the Second World War, tanks did not become safer. They became more lethal, heavier, and more complex. Armor thickened, guns grew larger, and electronics began to dominate the battlefield. But the most important change came from outside the tank, not within it. Guided anti-tank missiles extended infantry reach from meters to kilometers. Early wire-guided systems allowed operators to steer missiles directly into armored targets. Distance no longer offered protection. A tank could be destroyed long before it ever saw its attacker. Alongside missiles, cheap portable weapons spread globally. The RPG became the symbol of this era. Simple, durable, and deadly, it could threaten even modern tanks. It did not need precision. One hit in the wrong place was enough to kill the crew. Another approach avoided penetration entirely. High explosive squash head rounds flattened against armor before detonating. The shockwave traveled through the steel and tore chunks from the interior surface. Heavy fragments ricocheted inside the tank, turning the crew compartment into a sealed execution chamber. Real incidents proved the danger. Even advanced tanks were not immune to misidentification or design limits. A single round striking the wrong angle or open hatch could kill or maim a crew without ever fully breaching the armor. The lesson was clear. Thick steel alone was no longer enough. Tanks had survived shells by becoming harder. Now they needed something smarter, and that realization would reshape armor design for the rest of the century. The answer to shaped charges and shock-based weapons was not more steel, but different materials layered together. Composite armor marked the most significant leap in tank protection since welding replaced rivets. It changed how energy moved through armor rather than simply trying to stop it. One of the most influential designs used ceramic tiles encased within metal and elastic layers. When a shaped charge struck, the outer layer triggered the detonation. The ceramic shattered into high-pressure dust, disrupting the jet and forcing it to tear itself apart. Its own energy worked against it. This armor proved far more effective against shaped charges than homogeneous steel of the same weight. Tanks equipped with it survived hits that would have destroyed earlier designs. Crews remained alive inside vehicles that had clearly been targeted and surrounded. Explosive reactive armor took a different path. Bricks filled with explosives detonated outward when struck, throwing metal plates across the shaped charge jet. The jet was deformed and defocused before reaching the main armor, but each brick worked only once. After activation, protection was gone. Weapons adapted again. Tandem charges used a first explosion to trigger reactive armor, followed by a second to penetrate the exposed hull. The cycle continued. Protection was never permanent, only temporary. Despite these limits, modern armor changed one thing decisively. It bought time for crews to survive hits, to escape, or to wait for recovery. But time was all it offered. The methods designed to reach the people inside the tank were still evolving. The most brutal answer to modern armor came not from explosives, but from pure kinetic force. Armor-piercing fins stabilized, discarding sabot rounds represented the peak of this approach. No warhead, no filler, just velocity, mass, and physics turned into a weapon. These penetrators were long, narrow rods accelerated to extreme speed. On impact, they punched through armor by sheer energy transfer. Inside the tank, the effect was immediate and overwhelming. Metal fragments from the penetrator and the armor itself scythed through the crew compartment. Depleted uranium rounds made it worse. The material ignited on contact with air after penetration, burning inside the tank. Fuel and ammunition followed. Overpressure, fire, and fragmentation combined into a single event. Survival was virtually impossible. Design choices sealed the fate of many crews. Some tanks stored ammunition in an auto-loader carousel directly beneath the turret surrounding the crew. When penetrated, the propellant ignited in a chain reaction. The turret was blown off the hull in an instant. Crew survival was almost non-existent. In rare cases, a driver survived simply because the force vented upward. These were accidents of physics, not design. For most, death was immediate, efficient, final. At this point, armor was no longer failing slowly. It was being catastrophically defeated, and the battlefield was about to introduce a new threat that ignored armor almost entirely. Modern battlefields have reduced the tank's greatest weakness to its simplest form, the human inside. First-person view drones have changed how armor is hunted. Built from commercial components and costing a fraction of a tank's price, they deliver shaped charges with precision from miles away. These drones do not challenge armor head-on. They attack the roof, the rear, the engine deck, the places no tank was ever meant to protect fully. Some are guided by fiber optic cables, immune to electronic jamming, giving operators a clear view until the moment of impact. Improvised defenses appeared almost immediately. Cage armor, added plating, even absurd shell-like enclosures. None offered reliable protection. A small charge delivered accurately was enough. Swarms overwhelmed what no single weapon could. The cost imbalance is devastating. A weapon worth hundreds of dollars can destroy a vehicle worth millions. Reports suggest the majority of modern tank losses in recent conflicts come from drones, not other tanks. Armor thickness no longer defines survival. History has followed the same pattern for over a century. Every answer creates a new question. Every shield invites a sharper spear. If tanks cannot adapt to this new reality, their role as the kings of the battlefield may finally end. And once again, It will be the people inside who pay the price.